let me just tell you a bit about our author. Latanya Mapp is the president and CEO of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. That deserves a cheer, I think. Previously, she was president and CEO of the Global Fund for Women. Prior to that, another applause. Prior to that, executive director of Planned Parenthood Global, the international arm of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. I have known Latanya a long time in many capacities, and it's absolutely thrilling to see where she goes in her life and her career. I know that her commitment to advocacy and gender justice is kind of unparalleled, as is her decency as a human. So super happy to have you here, Latanya. Please read us a bit from your book.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to stand at the podium just because it's a little easier with the glasses on. So thank you all for coming here today. It's kind of crazy. Oops. So now I'm out of the, okay. So can I just stand here like this? Okay, all right. Microphone and book. But it was a year ago, and we did it over at Columbia, where we just launched the book, and it was a great session with some local activists. And so I'm really happy to have someone who was actually profiled in the book. So she will be here shortly, and we'll be able to introduce her. But because of that, I thought I would read directly from the section where she's highlighted, which is the chapter also. That's probably the hardest to read. But I'm gonna go ahead and give it a try because I think it's important. I actually named the chapter, Stay in the Game Even When You Win. So at the house of a family friend in Atlantic City, my mother enjoyed an outing with smart and successful people. She asked the host of the event about his path in life and the many books in his home. He in turn told her about the time he'd spent with Malcolm X. He praised her and how she was raising her 3 young children. You're so smart, he said. You are a unicorn and your husband is very lucky. On the way back home to Philadelphia that night, my father didn't feel lucky. He felt like his wife had been flirting to get compliments. She denied it and screamed his name as he pushed her from the moving vehicle on Highway 295, while her children silently cried in the back seat. Her kids were relieved later that night when she came through the door, but he beat her again and again that night and for many years to come. My mother's family had arrived in Philly from the segregated South after her proud father, a decorated World War II vet, was chased from his only home in Georgia. He would walk the streets in his uniform, like many of his white compatriots did, after serving more than 2 years of combat in Europe and Asia. He should have been celebrated on his return home, but unlike his white fellow servicemen, his actions were not looked on kindly. He abruptly had to move north, where he heard he could find a factory job to put food on the table and escape the threats of violence from white bigots, some of whom he grew up with and played with as children. When he died at 42, his wife pressed on, insisting that her children would have more than the 5th grade education she received in a one-room shack in Cartersville, Georgia. My mother, the youngest of the 7, was politely asked to leave her high school when she was eventually with child. The administrator said, there is a program for Black children like you that will help you get your GED when your baby is born. You don't have to worry about school anymore. You will be a mother now. She was devastated. She loved school. She was class president, played drums in the school band, was a medaled swimmer, and her grades were impeccable. Imagine with these credentials, if only she had been born and schooled on the east side of the city. The father of her unborn child lived in a neighborhood further north. He belonged to the gang that she liked the best. They protected their girlfriends and gave them nice things and drove them around in fancy cars. He could sing, and she would often find him on corners harmonizing with the rest of the gang. They had been together since she was 16 years old. When she got pregnant, they decided he would enlist in the U.S. Marines to provide for their budding family. Shortly after joining, he was disabled in combat, ending his military career. He joined the Nation of Islam, and together, my parents opened a dry cleaner on Broad Street. As a child, I thought we were like the Jeffersons on TV. They had a retail clothing business, a beer distributorship, and a slew of other dealings that kept them flush in cash, but at odds with the police, who didn't much like the Black Muslims. But from the beginning of their relationship, my father was an abuser. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him to be tenacious and called him a fighter. But that combativeness manifested differently inside our family. My mother was an easy target for his pain and disempowerment in a racist society that targeted him. Eventually, the sunglasses and Muslim garb could no longer cover her bruises, and the excuses to her family and friends were growing worrisome. In the closet with me, her youngest, where she would sneak a cigarette every so often, I asked, "Why don't you leave him? He beats you and he beats us." She didn't have an answer. She tried to leave once, twice, and again and again. He found her each time at her sister's house in Jersey, at the shelter, at her mother's. At the Nation of Islam, she became friends with other survivors of domestic and sexual abuse who encouraged her to apply for social services to afford living separately from her abuser. She asked at the relevant government agencies about getting an education, but was told that those programs were not available to her because she had dependent children. She fought back, enlisting the help of local officials to allow her and other women in her circumstances entry into educational programs to teach victims of domestic violence new skills. She was able to finally finish high school and certify in electronics. She left my father for good when I was 10 years old. The fifth time was the charm. Along the way, my mother met other women like her, strong Black women in situations that seemed insurmountable. There was Kathy, who provided her a hiding place from her abuser, helped when it was needed, but never made it out on her own hell, with abuse spiraling into drug use and eventual death. Jane, who, delirious from several days of nonstop abuse, set her marital bed on fire, maiming her husband, and served 17 years in prison, leaving the care of her resentful children to their grandmother. And Mary, who traded her abusive husband for a pimp after learning she had an STD that would prevent her from ever having children. But most women that my mother knew in the community were like Teresa, a good mom, abused by a partner who was married to someone else, who eventually asked for help and climbed out of her situation by taking jobs where she could find them. My mother's example taught her children early on that positive change is always possible. It requires making a different choice as well as persistent effort and commitment. And like the Nation of Islam, women who were a constant supportive presence throughout those years, actively helping and showing her the path forward, change is most sustainable when supported by local, national, and global communities that are in this work for the long haul. My mother is an everyday feminist.
Let me introduce and invite Stephanie Kimou up. Stephanie, come on up. Stephanie is the founder of PopWorks Africa and a board member for the Global Fund for Women. She has a decade-long career in African development and now supports philanthropic institutions in defining decolonization and implementing next generation equity initiatives. Welcome, Stephanie. I had already introduced Latanya. I think I'll just do the intro. Tarana Burke will be joining us. She's downstairs. So I'll talk slowly. Tarana Burke. Tarana Burke is the founder of the Me Too movement, which has galvanized millions of survivors and allies around the world, and the Me Too international nonprofit organization. She has worked for more than 25 years at the intersection of sexual violence and racial justice. So we have an amazing panel. So I'm just going to begin with you, Latanya. You wrote the book, Everyday Feminists, also features Tarana, who'd be joining us. But let's start with this very basic question. What does feminism mean to you? And then I'll ask each of the panelists that.
I'm going to read it from the book because it's kind of weird about writing a book. When you go back and read it, you were like, is that me? Did I say but pleasantly. So because I do use this term of everyday feminist because the realization that so many communities of women don't consider themselves feminists. And for me, it is the definition of feminism that they are, which resonates with me when I talk about the word. But I say that everyday feminists represent their communities in struggles for justice, equality, and social change, using their voice and other personal resources to drive that change in response to an environment of discord or harm. They are relatable and perfectly imperfect in a way that makes them human. They are not the once-in-a-generation lightning in a bottle charismatic leader. Yay!
Missed your introduction.
It was brilliant too. And I'm reading somewhere, yes. And I'm just reading the definition of feminism in here. So get ready
Because
for
the
that.
question on the table is, what does feminism mean to you? Okay.
So I was saying they're not the once-in-a-generation lightning in a bottle charismatic leader. Rather, they are mostly ordinary women with extraordinary passion and commitment working toward lasting transformational change. They are the ones who show up, push forward, and get the hard stuff done. So that's
Thank
my
you.
definition.
Thank you. You need a minute?
Yeah, a minute. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Feminism is, Latanya knows this, it's a word I'm still trying to connect with. I think as a Black woman who's worked in philanthropy and NGO spaces, I can't say feminism has loved me back. But honestly, reading Latanya's book last year and reading books by Black women and Tarana's book, I have it for you to sign. I'm starting to feel a little better, like I'm starting to be led by Black women defining feminism, which feels good. So because of them, I feel like it could be a term that does something for me in the future. I don't know if I sit with comfort calling myself a feminist. I call myself a womanist. I start with Black women, femmes, and queer folks, and I center them in all the systems I build. But feminism and I are still dating.
Thank you.
Oh, I've been down that road. I will tell you that, hi, everybody. I apologize for my lateness, but I like to make an entrance. I don't even have time to put my heels on, but that's okay. So yeah, I have been through that journey, so I definitely understand it. Was raised in a household where I had a lot of Black feminist literature, and I started off baby stepping with womanism, and I still, relate to that very much so. But I have one of my best friends in the world happens to be a Black feminist scholar, Imani Perry, and let's clap for Imani. And I remember, back in the day, we were in our 20s, and I was like, I'm not a feminist, I'm a womanist. And I was trying to make but I was making my little, we have another friend, Michelle, and they were like, explaining to me that it was disrespectful to the Black women who laid the foundation of feminism to give it away to white women. And I did the same thing. I was like, oh, well. And they were like, we built this thing. And we always build our stuff and give it away as soon as white women come. And that resonated with me. That resonates with me continuously because it's what people do with my work, right? People say, oh, well, how do you feel now that white women took Me Too from you? And I'm like, took it where? Right? So I think that what I love about being a Black feminist is the expansiveness. And what I love about the idea of feminism is the expansiveness. There is room for everybody. Being a Black woman that learned feminism from Black women, is the thing I learned first is that we center the people who have the least first, so that everybody gets what they need. It's not to the exclusion of anybody. My feminism doesn't exclude white women, but it makes sure that people who never get, who always are forgotten, get what they need first. And I tell white women this all the time, you should be glad that I'm a Black feminist, because the lessons I learned, the way I learned, make sure that you get what you need. And that's the type of feminism the feminism I practice. But lately I knew this question was coming, obviously. I was thinking about this too. I've been thinking about the type of feminist I want to be, the type of person really, but feminism is a part of who I am. So it becomes the person I am. when we think about feminism, we always think about power, because we think about the lack of power that often that women have. And oftentimes when people are defining feminism, they talk about, we want women to have power, we want women. And I keep thinking about, I want to practice a kind of feminism that is thinking about women's power at the same time we think about women's pain, right? And making space for that, because I don't know how useful it is to have power while we're still holding so much pain, right? What difference does it make? I think about when January 6th happened and you had these powerful women like AOC or Nancy Pelosi or whoever else talking about how fearful they were of being violated. The most powerful women in this country, right? They could have all of that power, but they still had fear for their safety because we don't live in a country that values protection and safety for our bodies. So it's not just about an accumulation of power. We have enough practices in this country, in this world, that are about an accumulation of power. So my feminism is not about an accumulation of power. It's about safety and protection on the way to liberation. So I'm still formulating how to articulate that, but it's just because I hear power all the time, and it's just like, we're getting dangerously close to some other systems that don't serve us when we keep centering power in our definition. So I'm hot now. Let's go.
All right, thank you. So I know you're all going to have questions. So we're just asking you to write down your questions, and we'll collect them and we'll ask at the end. But thank you. I think speaking of pain and power, we've really seen a kind of vicious rollback of reproductive justice or injustice, but reproductive rights. And of course, tomorrow, the Supreme Court is hearing the medication abortion case. The stories of pain are endless and outrageous injustice. Okay. I was just saying the stories of injustice and rage and pain are just endless now, and it's not stopping anytime soon. Can you speak to the interplay between international and domestic reproductive justice movements? And specifically in my mind, we've seen a bunch of countries that had criminalized abortion, like, Benin, Sierra Leone, a lot of Ireland, using different kinds of strategies. So can you talk about that? We'll start with you, Latanya.
I mean, I'll start because I do think that often we go straight to what's happening to us in the US, and as damning and difficult as it is, it's not, in my opinion, unexpected. We've been thinking about this since Roe, that it would get overturned. We've been having these conversations for so long, and it's unfortunate that it has now become part of a political dividing line, right? So it makes it easy in this country to try to make this topic, one thing or another. So I think that's difficult. And the reason I bring that up is because it's not so much like that in other parts of the world. Certainly where some of this religious fundamentalism has grown increasing around, and usually around some kind of political line, you might see more and more conversation about abortion. But the work that I've done in healthcare, most of my 30-year career, you did not have this as a public conversation. This was a conversation that families had. These were decisions that were mostly made with women in a room or in a community. It was, in my opinion, until the West started bringing much of this, it became such a toxic subject. So now this is where we are. But we do have to celebrate in countries where they are making movement. I mean, throughout South America, of course, as you mentioned, Ireland and other places, there's been small baby steps towards, and this is the everyday feminist impact. It's like just one little win is enough. And then the next win, and the people are there to keep moving and to keep making sure that even throughout that, women continue to have decisions to empower themselves. And so I bring that up because I think we have to challenge narratives around this that are happening in our country is not normal. It's not the wave of what's happening. No, we are standing out in the most egregious way, that we're harming people in a country where there is no reason, where we have capacity and resources to take care of our own. And in countries where they have so little, they continue to think of ways for women to have choices and to have healthy care. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and it also makes me think of just the colonial through line of white supremacy, because when you think about what's happening in Ghana, even the anti-LGBTQI bills, if you follow the money in Ghana, it is the same colonial money that is doing a lot of the conservative propaganda in the United States. And so philanthropy can also look at how they're disrupting these conservative, terrible narratives that are happening in Black spaces overseas also. Because like Latanya said, I'm from Côte d'Ivoire. And when you are in Côte d'Ivoire, the decisions around your reproductive life is so personal and private. It includes shamans. It includes like so many personal people that have known you for a long time. But now even in Côte d'Ivoire, the fundamentalism around abortion is popping up. It's colonization. And we're not calling it what it is. We're saying, you know, Christians, it's colonization. So I think if we can, in these spaces, call it what it is, colonization, white supremacy, we can also start galvanizing resources to disrupt it. And that's what both of you are doing. That's what Latanya has done at Global Fund for Women, what Global Fund for Women tries to continue to do.
Yep. I think the really interesting thing about what's happening globally and in the US is that we are not talking about it as a collective. I think we just had this, is it over? Yeah, it's over. The UNCSW, right? And so I've been talking about this now for about 2 weeks, but because I'm so irritated by the fact when I got the schedule for UNCSW, I poured through it to see like, what do I want to attend, right? There was not a single, and correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody knows differently, but there was not a single event that was about reproductive justice or sexual violence in the United States. In this moment, we are on the globe, right? We didn't move the US to Mars. There was not a single, in post-Dobbs, when we have all these attacks on reproductive justice in this country, when we have all the things that are happening, there was not a discussion about that because the US acts as if we can't have these. We're going to bring everybody in the world here to America to talk about these other global countries and how, what's happening over there, right? And we keep making these separate conversations when it should be one conversation because it is white supremacy and colonization, and the colonizers is right here, right? The call is coming from inside the house. But we won't have that conversation. And until those of us who are doing the work pull up and say, listen, we're not coming from the perspective of we have the answers. We're coming from the perspective that we need to solve this together. We're not going to really have robust conversations about that until we do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Totally. So just on that note, I mean, we have to look at the record of Mississippi, which put Roe over the edge, right? A majority, more Black people in Mississippi, the Alabama, and, refusal to invest in maternal child health, fighting sex education, fighting childcare. And of course, 108, I like to say, outstanding violations for harming children in foster care. And our Supreme Court, Amy Justice Barrett, actually said, what's the big deal? We just have them go to term, we terminate their parental rights, and we put the babies in safe haven, right? What I learned a lot from people around the world is that you cannot leave abortion out here. It's about all the rest of this. And we have to talk about it that way. We have to organize, we have to have conversations. So we need help in the US, right? So it's pretty important that it is one conversation.
It's one, you can look at Mississippi, you can look at the Bronx, you can look at, and the statistics there are the same as places like Côte d'Ivoire, places like all over the country. You're talking about poverty, You're talking about these low wealth communities, these people of color. It's the same things if you line them up, and we act like we are somehow better or different. We need to be having very similar conversations. And to your point, there are some communities that have figured it out or that are figuring it out. And there are people in this country that are figuring it out. They don't have the resources, right? They're doing it hand to mouth, out of their back pocket in these small communities, and they need our support. They need us to come and shine a spotlight on them and say, well, how are you doing this? These mothers who have got together in this small community center, how are you all surviving? And we need to help them scale that and shine a spotlight on that. And again, last week, and I was talking to a group of people at the Ford Foundation. I was like, a year ago today, there was an article about the Bronx that talked about how across the New York, the rate of sexual violence had dropped by 22%, but it rose in 3 precincts in the Bronx by, you saw this, right? By 16%. Why is nobody examining that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I want to say, the last time I was in this room actually was the Billy Avery event. And the reason I am thinking about that as we talk, it was because it was Black women that brung reproductive justice to the international audience. I was in the room in Beijing when these women blew my mind. And many of the people that were in that audience took that back home and started this process. Yes, it's way bigger than abortion. It is way bigger than what we try to metal it down to, particularly, as I said, along these political lines. These women talked about their right to be able to raise children, their right to be able to have a job, and their kids go to the schools that are well, and not just the ones they are given. And they, it resonated so much with people in those rooms because it is not just a singular issue. It is one that you're dealing with from the time you begin to think about your period and to the time you die as a woman. And these were Black women from the United States. And I was hella proud then. That was almost 30 years ago. And I'm hella proud now in the way they show up.
I mean, what? I don't even know how to wrap that up, but I just want to add that I think the more we can actually hold some of these funders to task, I think some of us we touch foundations and philanthropy and money, but I think the biggest thing is a lot of what they're talking about needs money behind it. We need schools, we need CUNY, we need so many institutions to say when Black women are saying, ask them how they're doing it. It actually means get them together, pay them, compensate them, run whatever, systems that you need to on your end to make sure they feel comfortable just to be themselves so we can see what they're doing. And I think it's sad because we don't love nuance and we don't love Black women's nuance. We don't love Black people, queer people. That's why we don't.
Any brown people?
We don't like people. I don't think we like women. But I just think if we can push back against the single story of gender-based violence and sexual violence and reproductive justice and say it's nuanced and addressing nuance can be expensive and we should put money into that. It's a start. It's a way to say, why are we having so many different conversations instead of one?
So just to say a bit more, we are creating an endowed professorship named after Billy Avery, who was the Black Women's Health Project founder and one of the big foremothers of the reproductive justice movement. And we're doing that in large part because she has mentored so many people, but it's more her strategic commitment to not delinking any of these issues. And our students saying to us, we don't want to hear about disparities anymore. Like, we actually want solutions. We don't want to have to choose between an environmental exposures class and a reproductive health class. They should be joined. And we need to know what to do when we go into these big jobs and nobody cares about science and evidence. There's microaggressions everywhere. We need strategic help on how to play it, because how many women of color leaders have you seen get run out of important positions, right? We need to start, for the ones that didn't sign non-disclosure agreements, we need to start really looking at what's going on and figuring out, we all probably have things that we can offer about those moments, right? So in a huge homage to Billy and the founders of the reproductive justice movement and the women of color who've been doing this work forever, we think our students really, you know, are really going to go out there and do great things with the teachings of all of these folks. So, so that's what that is. Let me move to the big question. So, because this is a school, sorry, what is your guidance for aspiring everyday feminists, like many of the ones we have in the audience or the many students watching who I think really do? I mean, I just taught I was a guest lecturer in a class, and every single person in that class was doing reproductive justice work in its most complicated form. So think about those folks and any advice you have. Latanya, you're the author, so you have to go first.
I have a whole chapter on it. Yes. But I do think, especially as we think about young activists who have come to get these degrees, to get them into doors that allow them to be able to have a voice, who often find when they get in those doors that their voice is not necessarily wanted. I want to say to you, keep doing what you do, keep doing it well, and go ahead and disrupt. We were a meeting today talking about disrupt, do it differently, bring it, you know, because I think otherwise, we are going to be in trouble. As you can see, it's getting harder and harder to do the work we do. It's getting more and more expensive, and still they're not breaking that number, 1% to local activist women, and half of that if you look like me and Tarana, just saying. And Stephanie, I'm sorry, yeah. Stephanie. So I am really, I think it's important to understand the work that they're doing is important. It's not appreciated as much as it should be, but keep doing it because it's going to bring you freedom and wholeness inside of you.
I love that Latanya always brings up liberation and freedom. As y'all saw, I'm getting coached on feminism, so I'm not gonna give y'all pointers, but I do want to just root it in liberation. I think when we say feminism, we still go into spaces and don't act ourselves. We change our hair, our clothing, our accent, and honestly, being on this panel with these two women and this micro instance is a reminder of I really need, if I'm going to work in feminist spaces, I have to bring my full self. Full Black, cannabis loving, DC love, all of it. And I think that it can't happen any other way, or you won't get liberation. We'll just end up looking and sounding and doing things in the simulated reality that we are all existing in, which is this idea that women, queer people, and gender expansive people don't deserve rights. They don't deserve the right to say who they want to marry, when they want to have children. And it is a weird simulated reality. So let's not continue to feed into the fakeness of the issues. Let's bring our full selves. So again, I'm still learning too, though.
Oh, advice. My number one advice to people who are anybody who is doing this work, but certainly if you are embracing a life as a feminist, is to find community. I think we are in the world of social media, whatever, the world feels smaller and smaller sometimes, but there are a lot of us out here. There really are. And so I think it is difficult to do this work, impossible actually to do this work without community. So find your folks. first and foremost. Wherever you are, job, school, neighborhood, find your people. And usually you can find them pretty easily. Throw a flag up, you know, do a post, you'll find your people, you know, they'll come to you. You'll find the ways to signal. But it's really important to find community because the work is hard. It is difficult to do this work, and it's going to be times where you need people to help prop you up, to whisper in your ear, to tell you that you're not going mad, or you are going mad. You know, and take a break, right? So that is the number one piece of advice that I try to give folks who are committing themselves to this. And again, also activism is not always picking up a plaque, marching through the streets, blah, blah, blah. There are ways that we need people to be active that don't look like a traditional, whatever we've grown up to see. We need people to be in movement that know about research, that know about statistics, that know how to fold up chairs. You know, I need the people who are going to go get the permits, you know. So figure out what your strength is and then be committed to the work of liberation through your strength. That is really important, right? We need feminist dentists. We need feminist accountants. We need people who figure out what your strength is and take and let your feminism show up through that. We need feminist men, right? We need feminist parents. Raise your children with feminist ideals. So that is also a form of activism, right? Feminist families. Read your children little feminist books, like take them to feminist plays. All of that counts. It does. Write feminist checks. That counts. It really does. Everybody doesn't have the capacity or the skill set. Don't go start an organization, y'all. Please, God. Put down the 501c3 paper. Don't need no more organizations. Be a joiner. Join something. Prop up the organizations that exist. Find something that is people that are like-minded and then go join the thing that exists. We don't need 20 more organizations. We need that one organization with the person that has a vision that needs support. That is what we giving advice. That's advice right there. That's what I feel like we are. So everything is a movement now. You throw, this is gonna sound crazy for me to say, but you throw a hashtag in front of it and all of a sudden it's a movement. But I had the movement before the hashtag. So everything doesn't have to be a movement, right? Sometimes you just gotta work. And so I just think that, you know, this feminism has been around a long time. We'll have more iterations and more ways. This is my advice, but also I am a learner and I'm always learning. And I think that we have to make space for what feminism is going to look like next. And we don't need to be so closed-minded. I have a child that has more labels than I can probably name right now. They are everything. Poly this and they this and whatever. And I love it all. I'm open to it all. They deal with me with grace. And I'm like, I want to learn, because here's the thing. The more expansive we are, the more people we have fighting with us, and we can see more clearly that we are winning. It does not feel like it. I get it. It feels very, very sad right now. It does. But if you look around and really count how many of us there are, forget the trolls in the comment section. We are winning. No matter what the folks that are against us try to do, this world is getting more and more brown and more queer, and there's nothing they can do about it. I say this at every talk I give. They're going to wake up one day and this world, their babies are going to be brown and wrapped in rainbows. Ain't nothing they can do about it. So we just got to keep the faith.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have some questions. We have some cards. We need one. I can just give me the card. I'll take them. Okay. Okay, here's a good one. With the rise of accessibility of online content, anti-feminist rhetoric has been reaching the ears of younger and younger boys. How can we make sure that the next generation of boys don't fall into the holes of anti-feminism and misogyny, particularly overseas where cultural pressures may be higher?
I'll just start a little bit, but I think it's some of the same traps. So it's not boys of this generation, it's a few. And I don't know how we could have held them out of the bubble, but I would say that the generation in general is doing better. And I think there are male allies all over the place. And so let's not get into the trap of thinking that a few bad apples is a representation of the entire gender. And I think it's going to be super important because for those of us raising boys, for those of us that married and to men, it is incredibly important that we promote them as allies, and some of them just even more feminist than others. And so I think we are already starting that, and you personally, whoever is asking the question, can take that work on as well if you have allies that are male among you.
Yeah. I agree. And I also think that we need to fight for consent education. I think that we need to have curriculums in our school that are culturally competent, but that teach these things, right? I think we are marching towards at least in this country, because I hadn't thought so much about the rise of it in other countries, if I'm being honest. But in the United States, I know one of the goals that we have is to get a unified curriculum across the country, which right now feels impossible as a lift with the way that there's such a fight with the conservative right. But I think that is one of the fights that we need to take, those of us who believe in that need to take on, because it will, the way that we have to re-socialize our young people, right, around so many things. And I think school is one of the best ways to do it. So
do it at home if they
you definitely, and then that's the other piece too. People have to take that on as a personal responsibility.
Okay. Good. Okay. All right. This question begins with, "This is feminist heaven!" Exclamation point. It goes on. Can the rock star panelists reflect on the role of the private sector commercialization in supporting or being a barrier to sexual and reproductive justice? Can we really trust them after the profiteering they demonstrated during COVID?
Ooh. I mean, as a Black woman, yeah, it's been my whole life. So it wasn't just starting COVID. So I guess you really think about the private sector, meaning like Coca-Cola, Google, things of this nature. I think there are people that you want to bring along, and there are people you want to change their minds, and then the people you just want them to acknowledge something. And I think we can't put everybody in the same bucket. I think sometimes there are certain people in the private sector that you want to do certain education, but at the end of the day, they might just need to know something so they can unlock resources for the doers. And so I think there are just some people you won't be able to bring along. And even when you think about philanthropy, I mean, philanthropy is it feels like the private sector a lot of the time, but it really is about understanding who your people are within all of those spaces and seeing who do I need to bring along, who can stay here and understand that this is their space, and who is next generation. And so I think we really just have to be a little bit more realistic about who is going to be in the community of doers and who might be the barriers. Because right now we're also trying to connect with people who are going to be barriers and change their minds. And that might not be the way to go, but I'm interested in what y'all think, because you probably work more with the private sector, but with philanthropy and with the public sector, I think it takes a certain type of resilience in the face of racism and sexism and colonization to be able to do that work. So if you feel like you have the privilege to navigate that space, definitely do. But also know you can't bring everyone along, if that makes sense.
I don't work with the public, private sector, if you mean like big corporations that much. It's funny, I was just having this conversation with somebody on my staff today, because we get approached a lot for people for like, or I get approached a lot for what do you call those? Like brand things, brand deals, whatever. I've turned down goo gobs of things because they just don't align. Because I'm just like, why do I need a car? What does that mean? Because it's just dumb. Like, why am I here? I'm selling a Lexus. Like, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I could, clearly, but it doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't align value-wise or whatever. But early on, I did a Facebook commercial. Actually, it's the first thing I ever did. But the commercial was about social justice, right? It was me. It was a Muslim woman. She was the first Muslim. This is so funny since I'm so anti, but she was the first Muslim police officer somewhere in the country. I forgot. They picked like these like pioneer. It was like something like pioneer, whatever. And they asked me to do this thing. It was like before some awards. So I did it. And when the commercial came out, it was a very lovely commercial. It didn't promote Facebook at all. It was just by Facebook, but it was really about us. And then when it was all over and I watched it, I was like, why did I do that? It didn't mean anything, right? And it wasn't even about me too. It was like Tarana Burke is da 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 da. And so after that, I was really super selective about the things I did. And so today we were talking about what would it mean for our organization to partner with brands, and we were like, we need a really rigorous vetting process. So I think to answer the question, I think there are times it's always going to be profiteering. They're not in it to help us, right? So I think we have to be extra smart and strategic in those kind of relationships. If there's a moment where you can use somebody who has a lot of resources and visibility to gain visibility, and they have to be in alignment, right? This is what I said. I'll tell you what I said to my staff person. I was like, if this is a company that had like Ben and Jerry's, right? This is the only one I could come up with. I was like, if it's somebody like a Ben and Jerry's we have some political alignment and they have high visibility and resources, and it makes sense. I don't know why we would partner with an ice cream company, but maybe it's, trust me, I'll come up with a reason, but I couldn't at the time. But let's say it's whatever it is, I don't know, but and it makes sense. But it's like, imagine our logo on ice cream across the country. That's major visibility for us. We could get messaging out. That makes sense. Right now we have a partnership. It's the only one we have, is with the Breathe Network. We offer free certificates for people who come to our platform. We have a healing platform to get 3 months of free that therapy through the Breathe Network, right? We don't advertise it. If you come and you let us know, we'll tell. It's like a little secret, little side thing. Because I don't, anyway, my point is, if you can find ways to utilize them more than they utilize you, I think it's worth it. But it's always going to be profiteering. I think we just have to be very, very careful. These corporations are never in it they don't have hearts of gold. They're never in it. Hey, girlfriend. They're never in it for us. They're in it for themselves. And we just have to be super strategic and thoughtful about it. Now, if y'all see me in a Dove commercial next year, I don't want y'all to be like, she said, just know that there's a reason. Just be like, she must have a really good reason. But if you see me in a commercial for Gucci, just mind your business.
There you go. There you go. All right, Latanya. Thank you.
Well, I'm gonna bring back Tarana's words too, because I work with the private sector a lot. We need feminists there too. Yeah, we need feminists. We need Black people. We need Black women there too. So but that means then you have to understand what you're getting yourself into. You have to find your people, like they were saying, and you got to use your voice. So, the only way these corporations, much of what they've been doing over the last decade is only because of the people that work there. Trust and believe. It ain't because of some profit algorithm or whatever. No, not at all. It's because the people who work there have made demands of them to be different, to show up on social issues. And so you have to be there too. So I'll
Thank you.
end there.
All right, so we're just going to do one more question, then we'll give everybody a second to wrap up. And then we have a reception actually until 7. And if you see people running towards the back with wine bottles, that's why. It isn't because of anything you said. So can you please speak to what you see as the most important relational skills to do this work? That's an interesting question. Relational skills to do this work.
Well, I'm gonna pivot off of what you were saying, Stephanie, about how you show up in your whole self. And that takes work. A relationship with yourself. That to me is something, if you have that in this work, I think you'll get through a whole lot easier. Because trying to be somebody else in these spaces will absolutely choke you. So I would say that relationship with self is the one that's going to be your hardest. So start there, because in many ways, if you can get right with you, you right with everybody in the room.
I love that. Thank you, Latanya. I'm a Buddhist, and I often say you got to know when enough is enough. And I think sometimes when we can get in this work and we're starting organizations and we're fundraising and we're doing this, we can get caught up in capitalism and we can say, that's not enough. That's not enough money. That's not enough stuff. That's not enough people. And sometimes I don't feel this way about Black women very much, but I think in other spaces, there are a lot of institutions seeking to do gender justice work, and they're being very hegemonic, and they don't know when to say enough is enough. A lot of white-led institutions who are used to getting millions upon millions of dollars because they've often been led by white women who attract somehow millions and millions of dollars. But I think we gotta say in the gender justice movement, this is enough, and I gotta make space for others. I gotta shut this down. What is your exit plan? It doesn't matter if you've been here since the 50s. There's always, it's a possibility to have an exit plan so you can make more space for someone else, Shonda. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Oh, what is your
What relational skills do you
relational
really need to
skill?
do this work? That's an interesting one, huh?
Yeah, it is. I'm sitting here because I think what you're saying is authenticity, really. And you're saying like expansiveness or maybe boundaries or something. I don't know, both. My next book, I'm not trying to promote, but my next book is about grace. It's called Revolutionary Grace, is the title. So I'm going to say grace. But the book is actually about a type of grace that we don't employ all the time. That's why it's called Revolutionary Grace. And so it's the way revolutionary grace is, I'm trying to think of a way to talk about it that is, it is the grace that so when we think about grace, it's like, making space for other people, blah, blah, blah. But it's like grace with a political analysis. That's the best way to put it, right? Imagine having, I think when we are in relation with, so I don't believe in a politic of liberation without a politic of grace, right? That's number one. And so when I think about revolutionary grace, I think that we have to employ it in relation to do this work, because what often happens is the people who are asked to give grace the most are the people who get grace the least. And so in order to do this work and do this work well, we have to employ a politic, as a politic or as a value revolutionary grace, which means that when I was growing up and learning organizing, the first rule that I learned was, I will not violate your dignity, but I will not compromise mine. And that's the premise, really, of revolutionary grace. And I think it for me, it's helped me for years to be in relation with other people. So it gives me boundaries for sure. And it helps me to show up authentically in every space that I go into, because it makes sure that I don't get worn out. It makes sure I don't get run over. It makes sure I am in service to everybody, right? Because the second rule was, and when I make a decision, it will be to serve everybody, even my enemies, right? But I can do that because I will not violate your dignity, but I will not compromise mine. So these are the rules that help me be in relation to people. Don't put that on the internet, lady. It's gonna be in my book. But but it's well, that's okay. They'll see it in a couple in about 6 months, you'll see it. But these are the things that help me be in relation. And I think that what I'm trying to write in the book is, I just feel like we have to operate in the world this way, because I think women, I think Black women in particular, and I think as you add more labels on that, queer women and disabled women and blah, 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 as you keep going on and on and on, you get less and less and less and less grace. And you're asked every day to give more and more and more and more. And there has to be a formula, a rubric, something for you to be in relation with the world so that that doesn't happen. So, yeah.
All right. I think that one of the things the students are getting at when they say we've had enough with the pile-on of disparities, we want solutions. Why don't we hear more about the everyday feminists? Why don't we hear more about the people who are doing courageous things, leading with strategic love, using rage strategically, right? I think we're finally at the moment where we're seeing that this has to be part of the curriculum, which is very exciting. And I have to say, I think, especially thinking of our students and conversations and our faculty, everybody is looking for a little inspiration these days, anywhere they can find it. So you three are amazing in this regard. So thank you. Again, thinking about, many of the audience are students, people in this work every day in this hard moment. Any last words on this concept of perhaps it's revolutionary grace, perhaps it's revolution, perhaps it's fighting the fight with joyful resistance. But any thoughts on any of this for our audience who are really engaged, I think, from all different vantage points in this struggle? Latanya.
Final words. I mean, I think probably not to lose ourselves in the container in which we're working. I think we have our own dharma, we have our own passion, whether it's supporting or art or movement. We have so many different passions within us, and the container of how we do our passion can change. So if your passion is reproductive justice, it doesn't always have to be a Marie Stopes. It doesn't have to be the same kind of typical, very highly funded institutions because you think they're powerful. I think we can connect to our passion and our dharma and change the container in which we're working. I think a lot of young people often get so stressed out about where they're going to work, where they're going to live out their passion. And I think coming from someone who I don't call myself very ambitious, but I'm very passionate. I think ambition is often like climbing ladders, trying to get somewhere, but passion is often, how do I want to feel? How do I want to make others feel? So connect to your passion and stay loosely dating your container, if that makes sense.
Final words. I said this a little earlier, but I'll just repeat it. I know that these are really difficult times. It is really difficult to read the news. It is really difficult to sort of live and exist. Look for the wins. They are there. Sometimes they are difficult to find, but they are there. And when you find them, celebrate them, revel in them, big or small, We are winning, y'all. This is the reason why they are fighting so hard. You have to remember, when people are at their last, when they are losing hope and when they are dying, they fight the hardest. They fight the dirtiest. They fight the meanest. That's what we are witnessing. We are witnessing people who have known for decades that this moment was coming. They knew that they could not keep this country the way they wanted to keep it, and that's why they've been struggling and strategizing since God knows when. And this moment was always coming. It was always going to be this way, and they were always going to lose. They were. It's inevitable. And so we have to remember that we have more on our side than they do. Look for the wins, but we have to keep fighting, right? The wins are not just going to happen. We have to keep fighting. We have to keep recruiting. We have to keep strategizing. We have to keep working so that we can keep winning. But we are winning. Remember, brown and wrapped in rainbows.
And I'll just two short things from the African goddess Erykah Badu. Pack light. It's a long journey. And in order to keep at this, we got to take care of ourselves and let all that nonsense go that's happening around us. And each day is a new day. So pack light. And the second one is buy the book.
Okay, so thank you. Let me just say, there's many people in the audience who I think live this reality of trying to figure out how to hold the course, practice revolutionary grace. I just want to call out Latanya Mapp, who leads UNFPA, who is one of the people that I consistently look to for inspiration when I'm feeling like this is too hard, I can't do it another day. And I think the panel's advice on this, look around, there's people, there's feminists, leaders of color planted everywhere. So don't let yourself feel isolated. So really homage to all of you out there who are in these positions. Don't give up hope. Look at this panel, and be strategic, right? So I just want to say a bunch of thank yous. Thank you to Global Fund for Women for helping us put this together today. Thank you to CUNY School of Public Health for embracing gender justice and reproductive justice in its boldest of forms. I want to thank Louis Cow and the facilities team, Michelle Finn and Soren Sanchez from our tech team, Desiree Joyner and our public safety team, Sumana Chandra and Barbara Aaron, our amazing communications team, Paolo Lelis, Ingrid Kalemi, and Sarah Ingram, who have really worked super hard to get this off tonight. From Global Fund for Women, it's Anja Tranovich, Shonda Brooks, and Kara West. And of course, please join me in thanking our amazing, what did the cards say? Feminist Heaven panelists tonight. Thank you so much, Latanya, Tarana. And I just want to invite everybody to hang around for the reception and learn about some more inspirational people, because there are many in the audience. So thank you all.